Hi there, welcome to the first series of our mining masterclass, and it's powered by Global Links Corporate Training, and I'm your host, Mr. Pagati. And with me, I've got George Tshesane, my good friend, my ex-colleague, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself. This topic that we are on now is around navigating the energy transition, and we want to explore the implications to the mining sector. George, welcome, and good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stia.
Maybe tell us a little bit about your background and maybe as it relates to this topic and the type of work that you've done in the industry and around energy, utilities, and public sector.
Yeah, no, thank you. So many years ago, qualified as an engineer, seems like ages ago.
Yeah.
Did some work in the proper engineering field, but transitioned to consulting, right? Spent many years in the consulting field, doing lots of exciting things.
Yeah.
From strategy advisory.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah. To manufacturing, to mining, to public sector. So, it's been good. Recently also was leading the sustainability and climate.
Yes, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's close to my heart.
That's nice, Yeah, I remember early days we did some work in the utilities sector, not just ESCOM, but EDI as well.
Yeah.
And I was a young professional those days learning consulting, and then you were one of the senior guys there. It feels like just yesterday. Né?
It does, but it's a long time ago, before we were grey.
Yeah, before we're grey, and look at us now. Yeah, George, the global energy transition is a big topic today, and not just because of the issue, the discussion around the energy transition, but it looks like, especially in this sector, a lot of companies are focusing on transitioning their operations to cleaner ways of operating. What are you seeing, especially in Africa? Are mining organizations really putting effort to transition their mining operation to greener renewables? And are they embracing the transition as a process? And what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think what we see globally, but also on the continent, right?
Yeah.
There's a push to be cleaner, to be greener.
Sure.
Now, and that's driven by a number of things. A lot of it is regulation, policy. So regulators are putting pressure. But it also comes from consumers, right?
Yeah.
Consumers want to be responsible, right? So making sure that the stuff that they consume, that they buy, is actually clean, right?
Sure.
And then employees, interestingly, employees are the very companies that are producing some of these or extracting some of these materials, but also producing products. Employees are also putting pressure on their own companies to say, what are you doing around decarbonization, net zero, responsible sourcing, and all of those things, right? So I guess what is happening is there's pressure from all different angles, right? From all different stakeholders. And of course, we can't forget the community, society, right?
Yeah.
Which unfortunately, that's one stakeholder that's particularly in the mining sector, historically has been left behind. But there's more and more... they're gaining more and more voice to be included. Number one, but also, there's a saying that I like, which says, nothing for us or about us without us.
Without us. I like it.
So in other words, whatever plans are being made is important to...
It's about ownership.
It's about inclusivity. More
are you seeing opportunities in the industry coming from the energy transition processes, opportunities for growth and diversification, where coal companies traditionally, as we know them today, are moving into different kind of mining operations, particularly in Africa? Are you seeing those opportunities for diversification?
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps let's take a step back.
Sure.
We've spoken about the pressure that's coming, that's being brought to bear from the different stakeholders. What then happens is if that the need to be cleaner, greener, and so on, right?
Yeah.
Then in the energy space, right? There's a need for transition, right? To transition from fossil fuel based energy sources to cleaner energy sources.
Sure.
Now, what that does is, so if you think about the transition, a lot of the raw materials that are required to effect the transition will have to be extracted and supplied by the mining companies, right? Now, and interestingly, when you look at the new energy products versus the existing ones, the new energy products actually will require a higher proportion of minerals, right? So, for example, if you take a internal combustion engine versus an electrical vehicle, an electrical vehicle will take up to about 6 times more the amount of minerals as compared to
the conventional engine.
Exactly. So with that, then comes demand, right? So demand for these minerals, and of course that presents opportunities for the mining companies, right? To actually transition into these so-called critical minerals, right? For the transition. So definitely opportunities there. But of course, with opportunities comes challenges, right? So, and I think one of the big challenges is how the mining companies actually, first of all, invest, right? Because mining is a long lead time kind of operation, right? 7 to 10 years before you can get the operations up to speed. So the investment in there is important. But so that increased demand means that the mining companies must now grow faster, right? As I've said, generally, whether it's vehicles or turbines or whatever, these products require a lot more minerals now. So they must grow faster, but cleaner, right? Because now we're in the era where it's, again, as I said, responsible sourcing and extraction and so on and so forth. So lots of opportunities created by the demand. But I also think that, there's opportunities for innovation, right? The need to do things better, faster, more efficiently, right? So how do we innovate? So the smart people in the room, right, have opportunities. And then, of course, one of the things we are not doing well at the moment is managing these products from cradle to grave. So a lot of the products that we manufacture end up in a heap somewhere.
Right? Stockpile somewhere.
Exactly.
And
so the opportunity to then have recycling,
and the value creation
value creation and so on and so forth. So huge opportunities, but of course the challenges, and I think the big challenges, one of the big challenges is we think that in the short to medium term, demand will outstrip supply, right? And so how do, as I said, how do the mining companies actually grow quicker
and then keep up with that demand
keep up with the demand and make sure that there are no bottlenecks in the supply chain and so on and so forth. So
you mentioned, George, investment, and what's the appetite for capital outlay? I mean, I can imagine the mining organizations are not going to wait for FDI or for investment. Is there appetite? What you're seeing, is there appetite to really invest in in these renewables or greener operations, or they're a bit sluggish in terms of taking up opportunities to invest? And what are you seeing?
Look, I think the appetite is there because, as we've seen, there's a lot more adoption of cleaner technologies, whether it's solar energy, and so on and so forth, right? So I think the appetite will be there. Here, I think the critical thing is scale.
Okay.
Right? And the scale that you need is you actually need the right signals, particularly from government.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's important for governments to state their intention with supporting this transition, right?
Yeah.
Energy transition. And so if you have that, then that enables the necessary investment, because these are long-term.
Yeah,
assets,
very long-term,
right?
yeah.
And so if you are not certain around the offtakes and the return on investment over the long term, then it's difficult to make the necessary kind of investment. So I think there's still in some markets, in the advanced markets, I think that signal, you can see it from government. I think the African continent is still lagging, and I do think that there's an opportunity.
Sure.
I mean, just on a separate point, I mean, we have the minerals on the continent, but we've really been just extracting them and shipping them
and
around,
exporting
right?
them.
Exactly. So opportunities for down the line manufacturing, and beneficiation and value add, right? So I think those are some of the issues that I think important to consider. But I think that doesn't happen in the absence of the intention from government from a policy point of view,
from
right?
the policy,
and
from the regulators as well.
From the regulator. Look, the regulators, I guess, will follow kind of the signal mainly from government.
From
right?
government,
so if the necessary kind of signals come from government, I think everybody kind of takes from there.
I agree with you. Do you think there's enough push from the I mean, you and I have worked in the utilities for many years. Do you think there's enough push in utilities to accelerate the transition? And if yes, how are you seeing that panning out over the next couple of years? Because obviously, alternative energy sources in this country are not an option because of the situation we're sitting with right now.
Yeah, interestingly, it's very lethargic still. I mean, we did work, it's probably now about 7-8 years ago with one of the utilities.
Yeah.
And one of the things we said, guys, if you look at the trends that's coming, because a lot of these are, essentially distributors of energy.
Sure.
But it's coal-based.
Yeah,
mainly,
it's coal-based,
right? So with the advent of renewable energy and these things, and a lot of these mini grids, distributed grids, what does that mean from a business model point of view for these utilities, right? And so we kind of worked with this utility and we said, listen, these are the things that you need to start thinking about, diversifying, investing, and getting the expertise to be able to play in those spaces. But I think it's still not, where I think it should be, because unfortunately, if this carries on, you'll find, I mean, in this country, for instance, there's lots of people who are going off the grid.
Sure.
Right? And so the business model now, for these utilities, kind of, they need to relook at it, because if that trend continues, I'm afraid they're in trouble, right?
It's
but the agility to respond, I think, for me has been disappointing a little bit.
But for mining organizations, in terms of energy efficiency, are you seeing a trajectory where they're beginning to explore other energy sources for the operations themselves to increase energy efficiencies, or are they still also lagging behind?
No, interestingly, I think particularly the big companies. There's movement that happens there. Just on a different point, I must say, energy efficiency is something that's been in the industry like for a long, long time. I mean, I remember as a newly qualified engineer, right? So one of the first things I had to do was to, excuse me, run a project around energy efficiency. And effectively looking at energy usage, right? And whether or not we could use the energy better. When you look at the 24-hour cycle.
And the load cycles.
And the load cycles and, managing maximum demand. And
peak
overall,
periods.
Exactly, all of those things, right? And overall energy usage. So I think energy efficiency in the large industries has always been something that these companies pay attention to and continue to do that, because you can never say, all right, I've kind of got it. But I think what has now helped is the introduction of renewable energy sources, for instance. A lot of the mining companies, have gone into partnerships with the IPPs to actually set up solar power plants for their own usage. But some of them, and which is something I like, is they've set up these solar plants for their own consumption, but also for the usage of their host communities, right? Which I think is really, really awesome. And then there are some other initiatives like electrification of the fleet, and we've seen piloting of hydrogen-powered equipment as well. And so I think it's really taken on. And I think for me, the green hydrogen, if we crack that, again, there's
a big potential there at scale.
Absolutely. So getting that and getting it at scale, that will be the next big thing, I think, for mining companies, but also I think just generally the big industries.
You were talking about the base load for Eskom as an example. I mean, if 80% of the base load comes from coal, and the average life of mine is 50 years, and we're not going to be off that grid in the next couple of years. Maybe it's just the way we use the coal energy might change. Are you seeing a lot of those base coal power stations exploring alternatives, or we're just going to run them until they die or until there's no coal, and then we wake up, suddenly we don't have alternatives? Do you think they are investing in those alternatives currently?
Look, I think two things there are important. So I think and you would have seen the debate around, for instance, the industrialized nations versus the developing nations, right? And so there's pressure from the industrialized nations to say, listen, you need to kind of get off coal, but the developing nations are saying, listen, you've had your chance to industrialize at the back of, particularly coal. So the debate will continue. And I think for that reason, so if you look at the South African case, for instance, and you look at the IRP, the Integrated Resources Plan, right? So coal will continue to be part of the energy mix. Right? Of course, while increasing renewable energy sources, nuclear, solar, and hydro, and so on and so forth. Right? So I think for a little while, coal will be part of the mix for practical reasons.
Of course.
Right, because as you and I know, solar, very difficult from a base load.
No, from a base load, it's not practical.
So it's either solar or nuclear, right? From a base load point of view. So that'll continue. And I think then I think the point you made around end of life of these mines, eventually we'll get there, and that's why I'm saying from a I'm excited about the potential for hydrogen.
Sure.
To kind of cover that. Interestingly, one of the things that's been piloted in some of these, especially the coal-fired power stations, is the converting them to, for instance, to use gas.
Yes,
right?
yes,
So,
yeah.
so those are some of the things that have been looked at, and I think we'll continue to see those types of innovation, right? Because we have to find the solution, and it's not easy given the balancing act we have to make. Yeah.
But how do you? I'm thinking as you're sharing that piece around balance. I'm thinking how we could balance, or mining organizations could balance energy security. With sustainable mining practices. I mean, Avu and I were talking earlier about sustainable mining practices. It's a very, very tricky way to balance, because energy security is topical in the discussions everywhere, but also sustainable mining practices also is important. But how do we make sure that we achieve both without obviously compromising?
I think with difficulty. With the difficulty. But I think for me, the point there is that we have to be deliberate, right? Because it's a journey, this thing, right? So overnight, you're not going to get it right. But incrementally, I think we can get it right.
Yeah.
So it's not, for me, it's not a case where in the next 10 years, we are free of coal. It's never going to happen, right? But we are very clear about the steps we need to take to get to net zero, right? And so as long as we are clear about that plan, and in that process there are many things we can do, to make sure that while we are trying to secure to be energy secure, we are doing other things that can offset the impact. And there's many things. I mean, we help clients to figure out what their strategy should look like from an ESG point of view. What is the end goal? And most companies will tell you they want to be net zero by 2050 or whatever the thing is. That's great. And then you say, okay, what is the baseline where you are
now?
And what are the things? What are the practical things that you need to do? The projects
Before
that you have to
there.
exactly. And so for me, that's if we do that, then I think we'll get there.
Because the gaps from industry to industry will differ.
Yeah.
And the maturity of each company within the mining sector, they are in different levels.
Correct.
And I like what you're saying. They need, if millennium goals or development goals say by 2030 or 2040 you should be net zero, and you are sitting and your emissions are sitting at a different level now, you have to work out how you're going to close that gap.
For sure.
And I think from one company to the next is going to look different.
Of course, there are those sectors which are high energy intensive, like mining, and the petrochemicals, and which are polluting and whatever, the highest polluters. And I think for each one of those, it's different, right? And so it'll and the milestones and the timelines will be different. But for me, it's being deliberate around. That's where we want to get.
But are you taking action now to get there, even if it's baby steps, as you said?
Exactly.
But
and then in the meantime, you could say, I want to be carbon neutral, which is a different kind of concept to be net zero.
To be net zero,
effectively, you're doing certain things to make a contribution until you get to being net zero. Right? So,
are there government incentives? I'm thinking, how do we incentivize companies that get to net carbon neutrality faster than the rest, or when they get there, and whether they're incentivized by communities, governments, or regulators? And how could those incentives look like? If I'm just thinking about it, because surely they're going to ask, wasn't it for us? The ones that are going to be, innovative enough to get there quicker than the rest.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you raise. So I think more can be done, right? So there's no doubt. And in fact, I was reading an article the other day where one of I think it's the World Economic Forum. There was a discussion there around higher incentives or higher premiums for those, and so to I guess the point was, excuse me, how do you, even the regulators, right? How do they begin to think that way? But as we speak, one of the mining companies, for instance, one of the things they want to do is they're saying we want to produce green minerals, right? And so, and for that, right, they can charge a premium, okay. Because
it's greener, greener outputs. Yes.
Absolutely, and I think we'll see more and more of that happening, which I think, to your point about incentives.
Yeah.
But I think it's not hard coded yet. It's not regulated. Quite.
It's something that I think all these stakeholders need to start thinking about. The regulators, the communities, the government, and the players, the mining organizations themselves around. We're chasing 2030 or 2040. Doesn't matter what it is, but can we create shorter goalposts or milestones, to use your words, to see if we're really going in the right direction?
I do think the opposite of that is also an important thing to consider. In other words, we will get to a point where if you are not doing the right things from a sustainability point of view, then you're going to be in trouble. Because then you lose the license to play.
To operate,
So because people choose, right, will then choose to buy those products that are sustainable.
So the risk is that if you do nothing or you're too slow, then you could use your operating license. At the beginning, George, we're going to the end, but at the beginning you mentioned something around government policy. Do you think our government is doing enough to accelerate the speed at which we transition to greener operations in terms of creating policies that are going to be pro cleaner energy, or are we just coasting? Because I think some intentional actions are going to be needed to accelerate it. What are you seeing?
The one thing you can say about our government is that from a policy point of view, they're quite good, right?
Very good.
So whether it's DSI or environment and whatever, right? So these guys are thinking about this, and actually they've got policies and thought pieces and master plans and so on and so forth. I think for me, the issue has always been the translation from that to action, right? And more often than not, what then happens is policy is one thing, but there isn't the necessary resources that go with that intent, right?
Okay.
So the investment, the incentives that you spoke about. So it's not enough, in my view, to have the policy. You need to have the resources, the money, the skills development, all of those things that go with actually making sure that that is translated into action. So there's so there's still a gap.
It's a very, very delicate play. Do you think there's active engagement with key stakeholders around the energy transition story, particularly environmental groups as well as communities, to basically engage mining companies to accelerate this? Because it's to their benefit. We're talking about dust, or we're talking about emissions in communities. I would imagine it's in their best interest, the communities and environmental groups, to talk to companies and regulators around energy transition. But what are you seeing currently? Is there active involvement of those groupings, whether civil society, environmental groups, practitioners, as well as communities at large, to basically entice and encourage mining companies to move their operations into cleaner?
Yeah, there is.
Is there?
Yeah, there is. Look, I mean, for an example, there was, and I forget which NGO this is, did this work, but they did a study in Mpumalanga, for instance. You'll know that Mpumalanga is mining kind of province, right? And also emissions, pollution, and all. So they did a study. And effectively, one of the things they were looking at was the effect of pollution on health outcomes, right? Respiratory diseases and so on and so forth. I know that they engaged a number of stakeholders. Government was involved, but community. So it's a society-based organization, right? And so they did this work, and it's actually amazing work because, you know, some of the things that they did, we kind of almost knew, but perhaps wasn't quantified.
Oh, I see.
So they did that work. So there was lots of engagement. And I think you'll find that there's lots of those things going on all over the place.
They're happening currently,
right? So they're happening. The mining companies, for instance, one of the things they do, some of them better than others. So they have to engage with the communities around the social labor plans, right? And so they have to say what are the things that they have to do for the betterment of those communities. But that process begins with engaging those communities to say, you know, what are the needs, also engaging with the local government and all of the people around there to then come up with a social labor plan that says, for instance, one of the things we want to do is we want community access to energy, for instance, which is still an issue. To my earlier example about mining companies putting up solar plants and actually supplying the communities.
Which benefits the community.
Exactly. Yeah. So these are some of the things. So some companies are doing it better than others. Right? So kind of mixed outcomes there. But I think, so if the question you're asking is there a coordinated process led by government, right, bringing everybody together? Maybe not. But I think the various companies, mining companies, they do it. The NGOs, societal-based, companies do it. Now, interestingly, one of the things we did is we worked with the mining company, right? And so they recognize that they actually need to collaborate better. Right? Yeah. And so by actually doing that, so that's a process that the mining companies themselves are recognizing that they, instead of each one doing their thing in their own silo, that's great. You need to do what you need to do because from a regulatory point of view, you kind of need to tick that box. But the greater impact comes from collaboration, right? Yeah. I don't know, let's say in the Rustenburg area or that area. All of the mining companies operating there to say, this is what we're doing or this is what we're planning. If it's similar to what you're planning, can we not club?
Can we not? Because then there's economies of scale.
There's synergies there and so on and so forth, right? So we, in the conversations that we've had, there's more and more of that line of thinking.
That's what you're saying,
which is great. And I think for me, if we can get that right, because as I always say, then 1 + 1 is not 2, it becomes 1 + 1 is 3 all of a sudden, right? Because you're able to
and you can you can optimize your assets and your efforts. And for that 2 + 2 = 5. You mentioned collaboration, and what are you saying around potential partnerships between mining organizations and the developers of renewable energy solutions, particularly those that are coming outside of the country. Are you seeing, because I'm thinking, FDI, no one is going to invest directly in this economy until they see those potential partnerships, panning out. Are you seeing a lot of that, or are we still waiting for investors to come at us?
It's happening.
Is it already happening?
Yeah, it's already happening. There's a number of cases where some of these companies have actually come together and said, we have energy needs. We also have energy needs. So together, how do we address that? And they've now appointed an IPP.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. As a facilitator of this whole thing.
Exactly. So it's happening. And
I think that's a game changer because those partnerships are going to facilitate I don't want to call it a transaction, but it's a transition. And then it's tell me, what is the role of technology and innovation around reducing the footprint to minimize the environmental footprint? Because I'm thinking, as organizations transition to cleaner or greener solutions, to accelerate that, we have to look at innovation and technology. I know it does cost money, but are you seeing appetite for organizations to leverage technology to move into greener solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So innovation in new mining methods.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one. So that the cost. The cost, because one of the big things around extracting these minerals is the input costs, right? So new mining methods for efficiencies, that's something that's actually been on the go. I mean, a lot of these companies spend a lot of money on research and development, right? And essentially is to answer that question about innovation. How do we do things better? In the extraction, in the transportation, in the handling of all of these things. So there's quite a bit of money that goes into that, So and it'll continue to be that way, especially now given the shift that must now happen with these critical minerals, right? Higher volumes, as I said earlier, you need more minerals for these new energy items. So higher volumes, but how do you do it sustainably?
Yeah.
So innovation absolutely critical. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Last thing that I want to touch on before we go, George, are mining organizations doing enough to educate communities in terms of shifting load from peak to off-peak and saving energy? We can't rely on utilities to do it or government to do it for the communities. Now that they are living and working in those communities, are they doing enough to educate communities around energy efficiencies?
I haven't seen it, right? Unfortunately. And it's a case of kind of I do what I'm mandated to do, right? But you can understand that
because it's a win-win. I mean, they'll save cost, and then the mining company, obviously it's a winning thing because now they've got more capacity to utilize in the operations.
So no, I haven't seen it, and that's a conversation that, for instance, I haven't had. Right?
Yeah.
I just think that they are, so. Because you'll know, one of the big things in the mining companies that drives everything is commodity price.
It's commodity,
So these guys watch this commodity price and a downward movement. Oh my God! It's like
it causes panic, and that's why they keep watching. I'm thinking about this because I'm just thinking if development trusts and those community organizations could use the knowledge around energy security, on energy efficiency, and educate communities, the little bit adds up. Whether you put a solar panel here or shift energy load.
Yeah. No, you're right. Look, in those communities, right, there's a lot of community-based organizations that operate there. And so one of the things I spoke earlier about the process of engaging in the development of the social labor plans and all of these things. Where it works well is that those community-based organizations actually are very integral in that process. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot that the mining companies can leverage off those type of organizations, right? And so there's a few that actually do it really, really well. But I think more needs to, leverage those type of stakeholders, because I think, as you say, it's a win-win, right?
It's a win-win, and it's something that we need to explore further.
Yeah.
Now, George, thank you so much. This was insightful and it's very educational. The one thing that I would like us to explore further in our next discussion is around the case studies of companies that are in the leading kind of area around this energy transition, and then so that our viewers can actually see, already these 2 or 3 organizations are already doing it. And then we almost want to use those cases to show that, yes, whether there's incentive or not, but somebody is already in the leading around these discussions. And I'd like us to unpack that.
Absolutely. And I think, we can certainly do that because that also creates because believe it or not, these guys compete, right? Amongst each other.
Course,
there's always competition. And so they're also watching each other.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think a lot of these things are still reliant on regulation, right? The regulators. So, but to my earlier point, I think the shift will happen where people will begin to choose differently.
Yeah.
But again, that only kind of takes effect if there's critical mass.
Yeah,
right?
critical mass. It's about scale.
You need the scale. But happy to.
No, in fact, I'm thinking as you're closing that, in fact, we can even go as far as inviting practitioners and leaders in those organizations to share their story and how you're doing it. I mean, how's your journey? How does it look like, and how you made it work?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. We're going to do this again, and I really appreciate you coming along.
Thank you.